Hello, and welcome to episode 5 of the Branching PathCast. I'm Marley, and I aim to explore how details can work for and against storytelling and game experience. Connect the dots with me. Better extrapolate than never. The common saying, "the devil is in the details," is in reference to the complexity and problems that come with actually breaking down and making real a more abstract subject or plan by going in depth and fleshing out the gritty details. This does away with the hand-waving and fuzzy discussion enabled by dealing with things at a higher level. It reminds me of waveforms collapsing along a possibility space into a point upon measurement. When something is examined at a level that is more distant, then there is room for the possibility space to remain more open, and the waves of different instances may remain undisturbed, and be different things to different people. When things are being more practically and rigorously nailed down, the collapsing of waveforms to hardened points results, making things more clear and reducing the possibility space as they do so. This both results in the increasingly rigid formation of the story and leaves less room for the player to fill in their own details. I have talked in previous pathcasts in favor of the procedurally generated uniqueness of individuals in a space, for instance, and this is an example of the collapsing of a possibility wave into a discrete point along the possibility axis. Although I have said that there may be benefits to tuning systems and anchoring them with generative seeds in order to give people consistently inconsistent appearances and help to make them more concrete and stand out as individuals rather than components of a system, this is not always the best choice. It depends on your design aims and which way you want to lean when developing a given system. There is the possibility that abstraction may be as beneficial to providing concrete details and uniqueness in physical appearance, depending on the context. In taking the approach that entities share an appearance, it allows for the projection of traits and generalization which may be more impactful depending on intent. When I was taking a cellular neurobiology class, my professor had repeatedly introduced rules for the operation of cells, of metabolism, or of systemic interactions, and then followed shortly thereafter with the subversion of the rule introduced. This continued introduction of rules and violation of expectations of those rules is a space I feel most comfortable in, as I hope to make assertions and then break them as this podcast continues on. Similar to change, the only thing without exceptions are exceptions themselves. There is no one way to do things, and I think the main benefit of understanding concepts and rules is to be able to use them to a purpose, and then bend and break them in an intentional manner. So there are benefits and cons to filling in more details and in making things more concrete for the player in the game space and in the story. Most people are familiar with the concept of the uncanny valley. This is the disturbing feeling that one gets as art approaches the limit of mimicry. As it becomes less easy to express the ways in which something is off, it becomes more disturbing. In this way, a less realistic depiction of a character can at times be accepted more readily and taken more seriously when they are stylized and reduced in detail. As long as they mesh within the operational space that they occupy, they may more easily be accepted as part of it, and the scrutiny they would receive is lessened. It is in this way that one may be better served to lean on more abstracted or less realistically portrayed character representations. It depends on the aim of the thing being created. A powerful story or instance is often going to be able to overtake the limitations of reused models in a game. There is something I think about surprisingly often in Skyrim, and I'm not sure how common it is to experience this chain of events, but it seems like it is somewhat common, even though it does not appear to be strictly coded to occur in that way. So, near the town where the Thieves Guild resides, there is a stable where one person operates it alone. This person has a strange last name, which you may ask him about. I believe it is Horse Crusher or something along those lines. And he will explain that he has given it due to a prior event where he attempted to ride a horse that could not support his weight when he was younger and hurt it badly. This, after I had entered his house and bested him in a fistfight for reasons that I cannot recall. To quote Chris Remo, video games. Since this all happened fairly early in the game, and the character and small backstory was somewhat surprising and bizarre, it makes for a fairly memorable character. This is not what makes this character memorable to me, however. After leaving this person and doing some things inside the town, I return back outside of it, only to be assailed by several assassins. A fight ensues, and this stable owner, having now felt us friends due to our fist fighting and chatting, although really due to merely proximity, attempts to aid in the fending off of these people. He is easily struck down, perishing. I also find this to be surprising, as I have really not had that much contact with anyone that would merit having a hit placed on me or someone coming to my rescue spontaneously like that, especially so ill-equipped. Not long after, I am met with a courier who presents me with a letter. It is a will with Horsecrusher leaving me a depressingly small amount of money. The whole situation occurs over a short period of time, and the patent absurdity of it was enjoyable and remains in my mind. I suppose he left the stable to his closer friends. There really wasn't that much to form a detailed and lively person in my mind out of who this person was. The backstory and name was interesting. Besides that, the behavior, image, voice acting, services offered, and systems that drove things to occur in the way that they did really had nothing to do with who this person was as an individual. But there was enough for me to grab onto and extrapolate who he was in the world. In this way, planting small, strong nudges of who a character may be, and letting them exist within a space that has room for systemic interaction and player exploration and connection of what is there with what occurs over time can create a more fulfilling impression of who a character is. This kind of experience is how we come to understand people in real life, after all. We are able to interact with most people, learn a little about them, and see them in situations where who they are may shine through, and in many ways everyone is just operating within the systems and performing their tasks as employment and life demands. What understanding we have of who a person is comes filtered through our interpretation of their reported anecdotes, actions, and reactions to things that happen. We cluster our filtered story of them and connect it with observations and with our understanding of them, creating a distorted version standing in for who they are. This then comes to be used in simulating and evaluating them, even though it is as much about our understanding of and perception of the world as it is a reflection of behavior and qualities of the person themselves. Dwarf Fortress and Shadow of Mordor are great examples of games that thrive off of strong, blunt characters let loose in an emergent space. This is devolving into me sharing stories that I have found impactful, but just like the experiences themselves, there is something about sharing these emergent stories that exemplifies and makes clear the principles more than me expounding on their properties. This is my hope, at least. I tend to use Shadow of Mordor and Shadow of War interchangeably, but this is specifically about the latter. So, this is another instance of a strong bear framing around which a character is built. This orc had a combination of traits that was causing me a lot of problems. He was higher level than I had been facing, and I became rather obsessed with besting him. He had a trait that I had not yet encountered, which was all the more amplified by the fact that I had been easily dispatching most rivals for a while before this point. After beating me, sometimes dramatically, he would refuse to kill me and rather opt for humiliation, in which he shamefully spared me and simply left upon my defeat. This wrestling-esque diminishment was frustrating and hilarious to me. I began to obsess over the stalking of this particular rival, and over and again he toppled my advances, then humiliated me. Surely, this must be met with an answer, lest my current orc companions begin to lose faith in my abilities to lead. When I finally beat him, it was an intense battle, and I wondered if he was actually gone. It was almost sad when he no longer showed up, and his position was filled in by some random. However, he would have the last laugh. It was a while later, and I was fighting my way through rival orcs and freeing regions from orc control. I came upon a special orc who was practicing necromancy. When engaging him, he of course raised many deceased orcs. When I began to meet them in combat, I realized that they were old orcs that I had killed in the past. This was a really interesting idea, and it was fun to easily best others and struggle quite a bit with some of them. When I was a good way through, it was with horror that I met the humiliation orc once again, risen from the dead to face me. His defeat did not come easily, and now, fighting with others, I was again brought to my knees by this particular orc. And in death, he performed a final humiliation and walked off, leaving me alive to fight on against the undead that remained. I feel like it would have been much less satisfying for me to have won against him at this point. That he was arisen from the dead only to humiliate me a final time was an amazing subversion of what I thought was the conclusion to our story. Dwarf Fortress deals with this in a different but similar manner. In this game, the story designates fortress spaces, construction, and dwarven tasks. The dwarves themselves go about the fulfilling of the tasks and living their lives. There's a lot going on at a given time, with much of it not easily detectable to the player. With all of this going on, and only a sliver being explored by the player at a given time, there are stories woven about the occurrences through the systemic interactions and the player's attentional focus. The development of systems and spaces that allow for such emergent experiences is helped by the supporting of strong core hooks that demarcate individuals alongside blank faces that may easily be projected onto. In this way, the occurrences and surrounding events may be mapped easily by the player, as the mind naturally connects things and forms stories to make sense of the world. There's a satisfaction in the connection of dots and the generation of meaning from the connection of elements and their relationships. This is selected for in humans, and we have long been a culture that thrives on storytelling and making meaning and connection from things. In designing a game around this, it is given up the reins to the player and sacrificing the story that you want to tell in many ways. Giving up control of a concrete story to develop systems and reduced characters makes this more akin to developing a story generation engine, and there are pros and cons to each system. I can see why some would prefer more authored content and err on the side of stronger intent and designer guidance. For many games, that kind of tight constraint on how systems interact, or how detailed characters are, make for a strong and purposeful experience through a meaningful story. This can be extremely moving. I think of Life is Strange as an example of a heavily authored game. The strong storyline and personalities in this game allow for player choice to affect the story, but still within a tightly confined space. The intent and feel, the overall messages that the game explores are very purposeful, and giving space to emergence and systems would not make for a stronger experience here. This feels very different from engaging in a game like, say, Far Cry 2. In this way, the careful lack of details when developing some stories may be beneficial in that it leaves room for the player to project, connect, and fill in spaces naturally. The degree to which authored content and player extrapolation can live alongside one another varies, and the balance that is designed for isn't something that is easily expressed. This is one of those things that I feel belongs more on the art side of game creation, and games have been assailed due to their reliance on player input insofar as they have artistic expression and say things, or be as expressive as cinema or a painting. But the fact is that the audience is always bringing themselves into whatever they are expressing, and games are merely a difference of degree. Although that is what makes games particularly interesting, that the interactivity and reflection of choice and action is enabled, and most other art forms cannot come close to that kind of interaction. But as with artistic pieces that are positioned fragments, made to take fleeting shapes as it is observed from different perspectives, that is moving along the gradient of audience impact on their experience of an artistic work. And just as the difference between such a work and a painting, part of the work is the restrictions on and the ways in which the audience may participate in and affect the art. Just as food may be risen to art at a subjective level depending upon the presentation and framing of the dish, or someone can affix a banana to a wall with a piece of tape, art is about framing, perception, and challenging assumptions. As in music, what is not included is as important as what is. Some things are built around the understanding of how brains process information, and thus purposeful illusions are worked into the art. The infinite ascent of the shepherd's tone, for instance, doesn't really exist, in the sense that it is not actually a continually rising sequence, but the surreal nature of it and the perception and experience of it can be extremely impactful. The purposeful absence of space in order to give the appearance of a cube can be thought to both exist and not exist. There is a perception of the object, although it is not truly a representation of anything other than a certain configuration of boundaries and light made to evoke that geometry. And it is impossible not to see the shape once you do, or to not be taken down a spiraling tunnel. It is in a similar way that the deft use of hard lines and fuzzy illusions can be used to make stories and gameplay experiences more impactful and absorbing in combination. There's always going to be a degree chosen for the different parts that make up the story or system, and how much detail and rigid boundaries should coexist alongside the fluctuating possibility space to be collapsed by the player and connected in service of their understanding of a relationship, story, and game world. The shared experience of a well-authored story is impactful in a way that is equal and opposite the emergent experiences that players may find themselves in when they are done right. The opportunity to connect, understand, and shape perspectives when participating in a heavily authored experience is invaluable and the bedrock of movies and series. Many games honor this as the core of their experience and are better for it. There's a space for emergent experiences as well, and as in their design choice, of which and to what degree genres may blend and cohabitate the story, the exploration of and dynamic of these different ways in which a game may be experienced and explored is also worth consideration. And I'm happy that there is such a variety of works that have come to explore these areas to the extent and breadth they have. Just as there's a tendency for there to be more of a shared experience and impact in the consumption of a more authored narrative, that emergent narratives tend to be more personal, and it seems like although these emergent things have an amazing experience that sometimes can be more impactful than a arching narrative that can be more generalized, it doesn't have the same story beats and can't really resonate to the same extent as the experience of the emergent story. I hope that this has been an interesting and thought-provoking chat. Please let me know what you think. I'm Marley, and this has been Branching PathCast, Episode 5. Please see the description to find a link you may use to reach out to me, and visit branchingpath.com for articles, more ways to reach out, and who knows what else in the future. It's all kind of in development right now, so you have the opportunity to help guide what this becomes. I'm grateful that you've taken the time to listen. Please consider blah 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 blah, all of that gross anti-social media stuff. Until next time, take care.